All right, welcome back to another episode of Net Chasers. Today, I'm really excited for our guest, Noah Henderson. He very smart assessment of college athletics. He's a professor. He's a former. I'm going to let him get into it. Noah, thanks for joining us. I want to start because I think everything that you do is so smart, data driven, and I think whether you're an AD, a coach, a thought leader. I mean, I think you provoke thought with the direction of college athletics. So I'm just going to dive in if you don't mind. But if you can just give our listeners, our watchers, a 30-second path of, how you got to where you are. And then if you can answer for us, what is the state of college athletics?
Brian, I think I might need more than 30 seconds for that question. But yeah, I've been I was a student athlete at St. Joseph's University, played on the golf team there, huge basketball culture. And I kind of, questioned one day, well, why are the basketball players treated a little bit better than us on campus, right? Why do they seem to have the best tutor times, all of this stuff? And then that was probably my freshman outlook. As a junior, I started to realize, it's because, they're subsidizing my rounds of golf. They're subsidizing my athletic experience with their media deal and, the attention of A10 basketball and ticket sales and whatnot. So I kind of followed that passion and that kind of 180 of a mindset shift over to law school, got hooked up with the company Student Athlete NIL run by Jason Belzer. And that was in 2021 before the word collective really took off, and was one of the first people working at that company. We established really the back end and legal payment for student athletes all across the country at many different schools at a time where things were very in flux, not to say that they aren't now, just a different type of influx.
Right.
Graduated from law school, became an adjunct instructor at Loyola Chicago. I'm now the director of the program at Loyola Chicago. I'm very excited about our sport management program and how we're preparing the next generation of sport managers. But on the side, I write for a new publication that I started called The College Front Office, where I kind of hit on exactly your question, right? Where are we going in college athletics? What is the world of college sports? And kind of what I tell my students is that this is a complete shift in an economic system, right? That everything we've ever known, the ways that we have thought about compensating college athletes is, over the last 4 years, all the assumptions don't hold anymore. And
Right.
even more so in the last 2 months with the House settlement and the finalization of that. So I think it's an exciting time if you are someone young, that there's going to be a tremendous amount of opportunity just because of the amount of shifts that are going to happen. That if you're quantitatively driven, there's going to be a much greater need for that sort of, skill set in college sports with player evaluation and modeling and forecasting. So, I think that there's a lot of concern right now, and I think a lot of valid concern about the state of college athletics. But I'm always someone who wants to have the mindset of forward looking and where are things going to go? College sports is never going to die. It might look a little different, right? How are you going to position yourself to win in the new era?
So do you think the state of college athletics is healthy right now, or are we just, we're evolving clearly, post settlement, but like where are we in terms of just, obviously you wrote about monetization of college athletes. So like, what's the misconceptions? How healthy is it? What's this next era going to look like?
I think it's too broad to look at that. I think you have to take each individual school and each stakeholder as its own, because there are certain schools that are really in a tough spot right now. We've seen certain schools drop down to Division III because of the result of the House settlement. I'd forecast that, schools that exist in the MAAC might, continue to look at D3 as an option where, we're changing, revenue generation from, selling tickets at games to student athletes who pay tuition, right? Heads in beds. But on the flip side, we can look at our most recent college football viewership numbers that have been helped by some pretty great games as of late. and
Right.
realize that the college athletics landscape from revenue generation perspective from Power Four schools looks as good as ever. Now they have a new expense, right? They have a new line item, but as far as college athletics goes, I think a lot of people like to whine about athlete payment, the transfer portal, and there's certainly valid concerns within the transfer portal. But fans are fans are never going to stop watching. The money's going to continue to come in. So I think, that question depends on who you are. I think a lot of schools are in a tough spot, but I think overall what we know as the institution of college sports is alive and well.
Yeah. So before I kind of dive into maybe some of your findings, let's kind of unpack, college athletics in two different spheres. So I've, had a 21-year coaching career at the college level, 5 others at the youth level. How should coaches function in today's landscape? We see the creation of GMs, 6 assistant coaches, so maybe what would be organizing a staff look like?
I think that it's a question, and I think that every athletic department is going to look at it differently. I think that, as far as building out a staff of assistant coaches, the way that recruiting is going is changing so much, right? Before, recruiting used to be this years-long process, right? Where the development of a relationship with an athlete in their high school career all the way until signing day and then into their collegiate career. But more and more so, that's not the case. More and more so, teams are leaning towards the transfer portal for filling their needs, especially high major schools. And, a lot of times there's a lot of talent left in April still for low major schools, better talent than it's ever been out there before, just because of where, the people who eat first are looking. So, I think aligning your staff to maybe changes in recruiting and changes in the manpower you need for that. The budget is another concern, right? Would 5 versus 6 assistant coaches be as much benefit as that salary would be towards, right, getting a role player? So these are really tough conversations that I don't like having because it is limiting of opportunity, right? At the end of the day, that's one less position for an up and coming coach. But as an athletics director, right, you're going to have to make some decisions on what's going to move the needle. And usually that needle's looking at, right, wins in a season and conference championships. And if those dollars are better allocated elsewhere, I think that athletic directors are probably going to move that way.
Yeah. So let's go to that level. You're an athletic director having to manage kind of the changing landscape post settlement, and then obviously the revenue generating sports versus is a conversation. So, what are you seeing in terms of how athletic directors are building out their staff and their executive team?
Yeah, I think that you're seeing position cuts across the board, and you're just trying to increase efficiency, right? You have a new line item expense that's never been there before, athlete payment. A lot of what it comes down to at mid-major levels, right? I'm an A10 fan through and through, went to St. Joe's, now at Loyola. And I can tell you there's tremendous spending discrepancy from the top of the A10 down to the bottom, right? And for those schools that are lesser resourced, any way that you can find money in your budget, whether that's the reduction of staff, which again, I hate to say, I'm not the one who wants to make these decisions, or travel schedules, right? And more regionally, if you can schedule more games where it's a bus ride instead of a flight, right? Those dollars add up. So I think that there's cost saving comes in a lot of different forms. It doesn't have to necessarily be the elimination of staff, but we've seen it. We saw it not just at, the mid-major level, but we saw USC over the summer lay off a tremendous amount of their athletic staff, right? It's hitting everyone, and it's going to be really interesting moving forward.
Yeah. So you started, you have a great series out with college basketball GM State of the Union. Can you unpack that for us a little bit and talk a little bit about your findings as it relates to, just how much money's involved, but also just where is this game going and where will it have influence on college athletics?
Yeah, so I started this series, the College GM State of the Union, simply because I've been connected to a few people occupying these new positions. We have, off the record conversations all the time. And I wanted to find some way to kind of synthesize this, right? Without naming names or pulling actual quotes, so I can still have these very candid discussions with, assistant coaches who are operating as GMs, Dobos who are operating as GMs, people with the actual GM title, director of player personnel, right? There's so many different names for kind of the same set of responsibilities within a coaching staff right now. Right. But really what I want to do is, find the key differences, right? And that's what's important to me is, right, where a program's going to win, right? That's ultimately winning on the margins. That was what fascinated me about the MLB and Moneyball and the sabermetric revolution is, right, how you could have a team like the Athletics or even a higher spending team like the Cardinals who ended up winning World Series, find strategic advantages to keep them competitive. Right. Because I think that that's ultimately what, us college basketball fans yearn for. We want to see those Cinderella stories in March. We want to see a school like Wofford come in and sit in the top 25 at some point in the season, right? That's exciting. I personally don't think that that's a dead idea. And what I'm trying to do is see how teams are structuring, where they're finding their little advantages, where they're turning to stay competitive in this new landscape. So I'm looking at a whole bunch of things, right? Multi-year deals, something that's very new, that people are really just now experimenting with. And I'm pretty negative outside of like very select circumstance to ever do a multi-year deal. The introduction of buyouts in a player contract. If you're going to do a buyout, how does that work in the legal system, right? You can't just have this crazy high number, right? That a court of law won't hold that up. We're looking at, right, roster building, how important depth is. We saw it this year with Rutgers. Right, they had 2 players that are lottery picks, and they had a losing conference record. Yeah. That doesn't make a tremendous amount of sense. But when you look at the budget and you look at how other teams are building with more depth, right, more two-way players, right, you're starting to see patterns that work in college sports. So I'm exploring all of that, right, the addition of scholarships, all of these fun things on that series. Go read it if you want to. It's a little bit dense at times, but I'm having fun with it.
No, what I like about it is that, you get into the weeds, but then there's times where you pan out, much like what we're just talking about, how so many different teams are building different ways. Is there a leader in the clubhouse, to take a golf analogy, that is doing it in a way where they might be the Athletics of college basketball, kind of, data driven, but doing it in a way where they're managing their roster in a way that is, they're positive stewards of that money?
It's interesting. I haven't talked to the program, but through my conversations, I hear a lot of rumblings of Radford. Everyone's saying Radford. At least that they're experimenting and trying new things. Now, that's just from multiple conversations. That name keeps coming up. I haven't done my own digging on that. So as far as a Moneyball type team, I think, I've also heard that Radford has a little bit of change, but right, that's a team that, based on people in the industry, could be coming out hot next year. Not necessarily a Moneyball team, but I think that the system that I see moving forward that works really well is Purdue. I mean, that's no surprise. They've been a powerhouse in the Big Ten for as long as I've been alive, and and Coach Painter's been there. But what I've really isolated with Purdue is the value of his scouting. Right? It used to be, recruiting's everything, or it used to be everything, right? But now you can't stack a team of, elite prospects. The days of crazy recruiting classes are really over. You're going to blow most of your budget if you have 2 5-stars on those 2 players. So if you look through history, you can see Matt Painter has had a tremendous amount of All-Americans.
Right.
None of those players have ever been really top 50 in their graduating class in the prep ratings. You can look at guys, throughout, his tenure, and they're all usually going to be coming from Indiana, kind of under-recruited guys in kind of hotbed of college basketball that end up being tremendous performers, right? And that is so valuable. If you have a team budget in today's landscape in the Big Ten, it's going to be between $4 to $7 million. At Purdue, probably on the higher end of that range. And you can have, someone like a CJ Cox from this year's class come in, and on what's likely a pretty cheap deal compared to that production that you could find in the transfer portal or from a higher rated recruit, come in and perform that well on kind of a cheap deal. Well, you freed up so much cash to spend on other areas of your team, right? The Kaufman Wrens that are experienced and already in that system. So, Painter's eye for value recruiting and also development, let's not forget that that's a huge part of this equation, is second to none. And that skill set is only growing in importance when you've kind of constrained these budgets in this new landscape.
So let's kind of go into that revenue side. So what are some skill set, or maybe even what does a good GM at the college level? Because you've written about how NBA can influence college basketball and whatnot. So what does a GM look like, or what are the skill sets that they should have with this management, with how the contracts are in the game, the multi-year deal that you brought up? Like, what should a good GM look like, or that person in that role?
I mean, I think that's the $1 million question. Like, we're seeing people of all different backgrounds fill these roles right now. I think there's a couple places that are more common than others. Former coaches coming back and working as GMs. You're seeing that at Villanova with Baker Dunleavy, UCSD with Bill Carr. There's several others that have been coaches and now are moving into this GM role. And, I would have to think they're leaning into that Painter skill set. You can see what UCSD did this year with a tremendous amount of D2 talent that they brought in and had tremendous production.
Right.
It's not surprising that their GM spent a lot of time as a Division II coach, right? And if that's UCSD, a team in the Big West who's probably doesn't have the biggest budget, right, exploiting that value, right, exploiting that knowledge and that skill set of their GM is crazy powerful. They played a good game against Michigan, right? In the tournament, right? That was a team that could have really made some noise more than they did this year. If you're more of a casual fan, UCSD was really, really good. So I think that you're seeing that route taken a lot. Coaches, I think you are seeing NBA front office personnel. I mean, there's so many people out of the Oklahoma City front office that have moved to the college ranks just this year alone. And I think that, leveraging those types of tools and sort of that NBA mindset that, right, the NBA mindset is all about this concept of bites at the apple, right? We're going to stack two veteran stars, whoever they are. We're going to try to get really good, established players. And then we're going to have some of our mid-level guys. But really what we're trying to do is find outside production from someone on a rookie scale contract or someone closer to minimum, right? And if one of those guys can take off, right, if we can have a Peyton Pritchard who's playing for very little money and providing a ton of, value as a role player, then that's how we're going to win a championship, right? The more value we can get from, we don't really have a shot if our star players are out. They give us too much production, right? If those guys are injured or those guys don't come in and perform, right, we're in trouble. Right. So you have to have that, and you have to have, quite a lot of certainty that the expensive guys from the portal or your 5-star recruit, right, that's kind of the college version of this, are coming in. But then if you have that depth behind it, that's where you take a good team to a great team, and that's, I think, kind of the mindset of all of those NBA guys. Not to say that the former coaches don't understand that. I think that everyone understands that, but that's kind of that NBA front office philosophy that I think applies to college basketball. Now, there's a lot of stuff that might not apply, right? We live in a totally different system. There's no CBA. There's no max contract, minimum contract, multi-years, trades. So you remove a lot of those guardrails, but that's kind of the core that stays together. And you're just seeing other basketball personnel come in there, people with deep ties to high school recruiting networks that are being plugged into this GM space simply because of their connections and their closeness to the AAU circuits.
Yeah, I've always thought the differences of levels is the depth of the roster. Do you think with the amount of money, but also there's you kind of brought up how you can't really stack teams anymore. Does that help the mid-major? Is there more of a divide? Does it close the gap? Like what are you seeing, and what's your opinion on that?
We just have to wait and see. I think a lot of the mid-majors I talk to stay away from the really expensive guys, or at least try to, unless they're maybe retaining them and they can get some financial support to retain them from maybe a donor who's been impressed with the season and wants to contribute to the rev share fund. But I think mid-major's real advantage right now, I think, is oftentimes if these programs don't have football, all of your focus is going towards men's and women's basketball. So I think that, the D1 AAA schools are definitely advantaged here just because of their prioritization.
Yeah.
I think that another big thing to think about is that a lot of players lose value if they sit on the bench, right? That minutes are very valuable. So, I talked earlier, I kind of teased it, I think very unique circumstances a high major should ever give an athlete a multi-year deal. And that's only an athlete that they don't think has a chance to play in year one. Because athletes lose a lot of their, and I'm not talking about 5 stars and high 4s, but right, the majority of recruits who come in, if you don't have any college film, right, what you can command in year 2 is pretty limited. So for agents who are looking at their athletes and they're, mapping out their trajectory, a mid-major where I could go in and, I'm getting recruited by Clemson and I'm getting recruited by Campbell. And I know that at Clemson, they're bringing in guys from the portal. And those juniors and seniors on the team are men who are developed and they've been in this system. They've been in a college strength training. It's going to be hard for me to break into that rotation. If Clemson wants to give you a 2-year deal, you take it. And then with the understanding that you can develop and you have this cushion for 2 years. But if that's not on the table, I would much rather go to a Campbell where I know I could at least get 12 minutes a night, right? And have some film and have some, market value going into next year. So I think that mid-majors have a real sales pitch there for talented recruits who might not be able to break rotations at Power 4 schools or higher, more desirable programs. I think that mid-majors now I have quantifiable data that mid-majors are recruiting better out of high school than ever, right? We've seen what Patino and his staff have done up at St. John's, right? They took 1 high school recruit this season.
Right.
They've been very vocal about we're a transfer portal team, right? The philosophy up at St. John's is that, players are assets, that we're not really here for you to develop. You need to come in and on day 1, you need to be ready to perform and provide production, right? That's why you are here on this roster. It's year to year. And I think that, that philosophy that very hard line approach might not be adopted across the country. But I think that it partially is at a lot of schools, and a lot of these high major teams are prioritizing older players because it's a known entity. What you're getting more or less from a player that's been in college, played mid-major basketball, played high major basketball, right? They've been around that competition. So I think that, that opens up a lot of spots that would have gone to high school recruits now to these mid-major teams. And now that you're going to see a lot more 4-stars go to the Mountain West, you're going to see a lot more 4-stars go to the A10 because other teams aren't calling.
Right. I've always thought, this is just kind of a random thing,
Yeah.
that the coaches or the head coaches or the programs, however you want to, package them, who say we only recruit portal, or we only, the onlys, that throw is more of a marketing thing, just so that players know, hey, if I can, you brought up playing time. Playing time's always been the commodity, so if I can get on the court, add to my numbers, I know at least a program, if not more, that will take a transfer. So I don't know. I've always thought that was more of a positioning thing than anything else. I coached on the women's side, so I'm kind of eager to get your take on just where the women's game is going. How does it fit into an athletic department, and where's the revenue, not only for those players, but the revenue that ADs might have to find for those athletes?
Yeah, and so I think that speaking from my experience just around the A10, women's basketball is still getting paid. The men's team takes up a lion's share of the payment. I don't think that that's surprising news to anyone, but women's basketball players are getting compensated. And the way that most athletic directors are making those decisions across the country really comes from revenue in. Right? What's our share of revenue in from women's basketball as compared to the rest of our sports? And you're going to see allocations mirror that pretty closely. There might be years where there's a little bit of a deviation for some strategic reason. But right, if the women's team brings in 8% of the revenue and the men's team brings in 92, you're going to see that split. If you're at Iowa and it looks a little different down there, right, you're going to see a much more generous amount given to that women's team. That's kind of the way that, everyone I've talked to is thinking about this. Certain schools are giving rev share money to, all of their athletics teams or a lot of their athletics teams. Now it's going to be dollars and cents compared to men's football and men's basketball.
Right.
But SEC baseball is still getting money. Hockey is still getting money at a lot of these Midwest and Northeast schools. Women's basketball, again, I think it comes down to the revenue that they're bringing in, right? If you sell a lot of tickets and you have a good culture, right, that's certainly going to help.
Yeah. Where, Olympic sports, or I hate saying non-revenue, but, just the smaller sports, where's their lane? Are these going to be tough decisions for athletic directors? Is there a format or a mechanism in place that you have found that the distribution is getting to those sports and they're safe? Because, obviously on the West Coast, there's regional sports out here that are much different than the regional sports back east. What are your findings, or what's your opinion on that?
Yeah, I think that we've seen with tennis. Tennis has been on the chopping block. I don't know the number off the top of my head, but several universities have cut their men's and women's tennis teams. It seems to be the first one to go, which is unfortunate. I was a Olympic sport non-rev. You don't offend me by saying non-rev, by the way. I played a lot of golf tournaments, and the fans, there were very few spectators. So right. I know we were bleeding money as a sport. But what I can say is that I think that, you might see different approaches, and this isn't really a short-term thing, but more of a long-term solution for some schools, of different approaches of, right, the spending of those non-revs. We've seen Northern Illinois in the last year move their football team to the Mountain West Conference, where the rest of their sports are now in the Horizon League. Right, they've left the MAC and are playing a much more regional schedule for all of their non-revenue sports. I wouldn't be surprised if we see teams that have, right, a sport that is kind of their priority, if they want to lock it into a bigger conference with a bigger media deal, and then maybe find a smaller conference for their non-revenue athletics, or their one revenue sport that's not the main priority, and non-revenue athletics to keep costs down on travel, right? If there's a lot of games that you can bus to. I don't know. I think that that's really hard, because men's basketball, women's basketball, SEC baseball, football, all of these sports are pretty much professional now, right? There's no real way to look at it and say that it's not, in my opinion, at least. The kids are still in school, but they're getting paid to play, and that's the focus. Um, I think that if there's a way where we can make those sports have their own conferences, and this is a much harder thing, actually done, but if we could move non-rev to more of not club sports, it would still be the same level of athletics, getting the same level of training while at their school, to more regional competition, right? I don't think that there's any reason that Stanford softball should be playing an ACC schedule, right? I think that it's actually ludicrous, and I think that it's harmful for those athletes a lot of the time, right, who have to play 50, 60 games a year to play a conference schedule that's on the East Coast. So I think if there's a way that we can separate the revenue sports conferences from other sports conferences, that would be incredibly helpful. Figuring that out's a very tall task, but ultimately what moves the needle with media distributions, it's football and basketball.
Yeah, that kind of brings up I don't know, a thought or an idea, but like, you do see more and more institutions, like there's not one conference that the entire department belongs in. Is that the future? Like, is that going to be part of this conference realignment with, football leading the pack, and maybe they break off? I'd love your opinion on that. But, is there going to be kind of these just different lanes for different sports that is the real conference realignment?
I mean, in a perfect world, I think that makes sense. Conference realignment isn't necessarily my specialty. I'm familiar with, all the changes that have been happening, but I think that makes sense, right? I think these sports that play a tremendous amount of conference games, baseball, softball, shouldn't be playing that. I think that, for the sports that have really moved to professional, if you want UCLA football to play a Big Ten schedule, go for it. If you want UCLA basketball to play a Big Ten schedule, go for it, right? That's what they're there for. I think that realignment in that way makes sense, right? Where we, sometimes I think it's hard for us to acknowledge and say the quiet part out loud about the difference between cross country and football. But anyone who's on campus, you don't even have to be a student athlete, understands the difference between cross country and football, right? Like it is a tremendous difference. And once we've already acknowledged it by where the dollars are going, right? There's not many cross country programs that are getting rev share allocations. And if they are, it's quite small. And this isn't some vendetta I have against cross country. This is just the reality, right? So why does everything need to be the same for every sport? It already isn't. So if we can find ways to, have more regional matchups, and I think sports would be better for it. I always loved my Big Five competition and Drexel, the City Six, right? When I was in Philadelphia, like that was fun. We knew everyone, like we all lived miles away from each other. If you could bring some of those regional matchups back in non-revenue sports, I think it would even generate more fan interest to begin with for some of that stuff. So that's my thought. But
yeah. So put us in maybe in a management frame of mind, what's at risk or what's the biggest priority for athletic directors in today's landscape? That's the kind of the 1A, but 1B, what's at risk of maybe making the wrong decision? There's so much money involved there, everything's changing, everything's moving, everyone's running towards this opportunity. But if you're the AD, you got to make tough decisions. What's the priority? But then if you make the wrong one, what's at risk?
Yeah, I think right now there's a lot of optics risk. And what I study a lot right now is a lot of roster construction, a lot of the actual, rev share contracts. I think that anytime you involve yourself in litigation or any sort of snafu that the media picks up, it's kind of a stain on your institution. And Tennessee had a holdout and they're going to be fine, right? They're Tennessee. They're going to still be able to attract recruits. They have money. UNLV, similarly. I think right now, making sure that your rev share contracts are fair, that they are reviewed thoroughly, which all of this stuff goes through University General Counsel, and those folks in those positions are largely competent, even if they don't have, a direct sports and entertainment experience. But But I think that, avoiding those big moments that could optically damage your program, that could harm your desirability for future recruits to want to go there, right? That's a lot of the reason why I advise schools against multi-years is not for any, I think that they could be a great strategic tool. But right now, there's nothing that really enforces them. And if a student wants to leave, you're going to have to sue them. And that's going to get picked up by Sports Illustrated. That's going to get picked up by ESPN. The 16-year-olds and their agents might not want to go to a school that's so antagonistic against their athletes, right? The risk of a holdout is a nightmare for a coach to deal with. It harms relationships, right? In pro sports, it's become a little bit more commonplace to have an athlete hold out. Enforcing a buyout, you're going to have to take someone to arbitration or actual court, right? That's a nightmare in and of itself. So I think that at the end of the day, innovate in ways that aren't going to expose you to risk. Athletes have so much leverage right now. That's nothing new, right? We saw what happened with Micah Parsons. We saw what happened with James Cook, right? Athletes always have leverage. Something that people don't want to admit is that no contract really is a multi-year. At the end of every season, you can force ownership to make a decision. In college, it's much more challenging because right now teams can't own a player's rights. That's not something that exists. We saw that in the saga with Xavier Lucas out of Wisconsin. Xavier Lucas, cornerback, had a good freshman season, allegedly signed a multi-year deal, and then de-enrolled and went to the University of Miami. Right now it's blown up. We might have an interesting case about tortuous interference of contract that could, that if Wisconsin's able to show that Miami interfered in some way, it could maybe change a little bit of the calculus of how we see these things. But right now, I would say be risk averse in how you're structuring contracts, but be innovative in things that don't really have those back end optics, right? Be innovative in your procedures of identifying high school talent that could outperform their composite rankings. Be aggressive in your budget allocation towards team travel, right? Be aggressive in these things that could give you a competitive edge without exposing you to media scrutiny, I guess, or any legal remedy.
Yeah, that's good. I like that. So your professor, we're your class. What is a metric that either an AD or a coach, you can kind of take it any way you want. What's something that we should be tracking that maybe people aren't tracking very well?
That is a really hard question, but it's a good question. I think that what I want to see is coaching compensation in relation to wins. I think that that's something, and I've taken a tremendous amount of heat for this. I wrote an article about it, and I got some very unhappy DMs when I published it. But, this is one of the things that I've talked about is that, I looked at not the NBA, but I looked at EuroLeague basketball because I think it models much closer the NBA land, or the college basketball landscape. And that's simply because at the bottom of EuroLeague, you're going to have a team spend $4 million on player and coach salary. The top end of EuroLeague, you're going to see teams spending a little bit over $21 million on their player and coach salary. But when you look at it, they don't, distinguish player from coach. But when you look at these individual coach salaries, they are substantially lower than the percentage of the budget that's given to these college teams. And do I think that we need to go to the Euro model where a coach makes 5% of the total budget? No, I've never said that. I think that a college coach's job is so much more important than a EuroLeague coach, respectfully, in terms of recruiting, in terms of being the face of a program, in terms of managing staff, right? All of these things are very, very important. So do I think we need to copy the EuroLeague model one-to-one? Not at all. But I think if you're an athletic director out there right now, and there's a hungry 28, 29-year-old assistant coach at a low major, who has a really good recruiting track record, who knows the game well, I think that there's value in selling them on a much leaner head coaching salary, knowing that that money's going towards your budget. And that, yeah, if you can win at, if you can contend for a conference with the money that they're able to give you on that leaner salary and that leaner staff, that guess we'll be calling you next year.
Right.
And so I think that, if you can look at coaching in the same way that you look at the sell, right? Look at the sell, like I said, Clemson and Campbell, right? What's the sell of being the assistant coach at Clemson? Well, it's a pretty comfy check, I'd imagine. You're probably learning from a good head coach at a Power 4 school, right? You're developing, that's important. But if you're at Campbell and you're lean and you perform and you win your conference, well, man, that's when you can really take that next big jump. So I think that there is a sell to that. I think that, it's more complex for an athletic director. You bring in a bigger name on a bigger deal and you could get more donor money because of a splash hire, that people are more excited about that program, right? These things are incredibly complex. I'm not going to make it sound like it's that black and white, but I do think for certain schools, it would be an interesting project, right? Go a little bit on coaching, maybe not staff number, but maybe staff salary, dump that into the budget, and then don't have an aggressive buyout. Let them go. Be their platform to leave. And that's, uncomfortable because it's not the way things have ever been, right? These mid-major schools want to hopefully retain their coaches. Look, I was the St. Joe's guy. We kept Phil Martelli around forever. And that was, that's something you want to see. But in this day and age, I think you might have to modernize given the new landscape and the new rule.
Yeah. Well, I got a couple more questions for you, but before we do, I just want to thank you for your time and the energy you put into college athletics. Obviously, it means something as an athlete yourself. What is success going to look like in 5 years for college athletics, or maybe 10? I don't know if there's a number, but in the future, once we kind of get through this post-settlement fog, what is it going to look like?
I think that it's hard to project this far out because I don't know if employment's coming or not, right? That could be a whole nother can of worms, right? There's so much stuff that could happen in the courts that could totally upend college sports. But I'll do my best to answer, right? So I think at the Power 4 level, we're going to see a ton more parity, right? I think that this year's kind of screwy to begin with. Right. We had the House come in at the beginning of July, and I can tell you there's a lot more money than that 20 and a half being put into most of these Power 4 schools. A lot of schools front loaded contracts before that went in, before there was a clearinghouse. So starting next year, I think we're really going to see that range of spending constrict. There'll be deviations just on how much over the cap money you can get from video game rights and local sponsorships that these athletic departments are procuring, some procuring them really well. But you're going to have a much tighter band of spending. So I don't think, we might see dynasties. We see them in pro sports all the time from good front office management. But I think we're going to see a lot more parity from top to bottom in a conference like the SEC. I think that schools that were bad one year could very much become good the next, right, with a really great transfer portal class. So I think that success is going to look, a lot more like pro sports at the college level, where winning a championship is attainable for anyone. I think that, if you manage your money right and you hit on a couple of those bites at the apple we talked about. At the mid-major level, I think that's going to be very complicated just given the wide range of spending we have. I think that, now in this context, success should really be measured against the money you have, right? That if you're a 20-win team and you're only spending $1.5 million in the A10, that's phenomenal, right? That is insane given what most of the teams are spending. So I think that, moving forward, fans are never really going to look at it that way. the money's not public. It's hard for anyone to understand that. But for athletic directors and others in these decision-making roles, right, relative success. Yeah. We really outperformed our budget this year. We competed, we were, a conference semifinals on a budget that was in the bottom 25% of our league. That's impressive. That means that our systems are correct, right? That our frameworks are good. And if I want to sell this to a booster who wants to give us more money, I can show them why they should believe in us, right? That with this shoestring budget, we were able to accomplish something. Conversely, if you're one of the top spending teams in your conference and you finish in the middle, that's pretty rough, right? You should question the systems you have in place, question the frameworks, right? Question, where are we going to get our depth and our talent, right? Where are we looking, right? That's when it needs a shakeup. So I think that, it's not the same. Everyone doesn't have 13 scholarships for a men's team anymore, right? You're going to have to start hedging expectations against your budget and really using that as a measuring stick for, right, what's your process for success?
Where can people find your work, and what are you working on next?
You can find me on Substack at the College Front Office. You can find me on X at Noah IMG Likeness, Noah Image Likeness. I'm sticking through this college State of the Union or College GM State of the Union series. I've got a few more parts to come out. You should see the manifesto I have on my laptop. I'm picking out parts that I've written and trimming it and putting it into bite-sized pieces because I don't think people want a full book every time they open an email from me. But that's what I've got going on right now, continuing to, make phone calls, talk to people across the country doing this work and, helping people understand what's going on and also trying to help other GMs, ADs, and stakeholders, find little ways that they could maybe have an edge themselves and just ways to think about where GMs split, right? Those divergences that one way is probably going to be more effective than the other, and you got to make a choice. But that's where I am. That's where you can find me, and very appreciative to be, part of this podcast and you having me on. It's been great.
Well, again, I want to, echo how I started. I think your work is so smart when it's data driven, but then you're also having these conversations with, the coaches, the ADs, the people on the ground. I think that's when we can move forward. We can really push towards a system that, one, is sustainable, but also it can serve the student athletes. I mean, we've all been there. So last question, something that we like to ask is, so the future of college athletics is blank because blank.
I would say the future of college athletics is is exciting. The future of college athletics is exciting because there's so much new opportunity. It's something I mirror to my students all the time, right? That especially quantitative driven students that, look, my thing's the college front office. It's clear where my stance on all of this is. If you can find these systems and you can find frameworks that work within economic modeling, econometric modeling, there's going to be a tremendous value for you. So it's what I tell students in law school. It's what I tell students in undergrad, that, find your skill set, find what you're really good at, and find a way to make it work for this new system. And there'll be a spot for you in it.
Yeah, I love that. How many rounds left do you have before winter hits?
What do you mean?
Of golf.
Oh, I don't play too much anymore. I'm retired. Yeah. I watch film now. No, I don't know. The weather's going to turn in probably 3 or 4 weeks here. So I'm enjoying the sunshine while I can, but I'll get out to the driving range from time to time and hit it far and not have to do the hard parts of golf. Right.
Well, I've always respected the St. Joe Hawk, the work that they have to do all game long in that corner. It's amazing. But Noah, thank you for your time. For all of you who have joined in, thank you for giving a piece of your time. If you're on YouTube, please subscribe. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, follow. New episode drops every Tuesday. So thanks again, and we will see you out there.